tanker on the move I know about, possibly more, that we're going to fuel these aircraft. And of course, they take 20,000, 40,000 liters. These are not, one tanker cannot service 40 airliners, the aircraft on the ground, no ways.
Now, the problem with the lack of communication, of course, allows the conversation to be held and managed elsewhere instead of, for instance, by Airports Company South Africa. The Minister of Transport, has assured the public that there is no fuel problem at our Tambo International Airport. Now, in September, if you recall, Cape Town International Airport suffered jet fuel shortages. So in everyone's mind is there something else at play here? Does South Africa have a jet fuel crisis or maybe a shortage? What are your thoughts?
Look, we've had 3 different occasions, apart from this one, where there's been fuel problems across South Africa, and that's been caused by a number of issues. One was, for example, the floods, which impacted the pipelines and delivery of fuel, which you can understand that was a generational flood, once in a generation. The second was the attempted uprising in July 2 years ago, which had an impact. And the third was the Cape incident that you're talking about, which is a ship supplying fuel which is delayed. But the whole thing here is we used to produce our own aviation fuel at up to 6 different refineries across South Africa. There are only 2 left, and we're basically importing our fuel needs rather than refining most of our fuel needs now. So instead of us previously being able to refine from barrels of oil, diesel and paraffin and jet A1 and petrol and so on, we don't do that anymore. We import the product. And of course, we at the bottom end of Africa, so there's competition for this product. So it's you look at the roads of this around us, and if you see the potholes, you'll understand that that's what's happening in terms of aviation systems, is that there's been a slow decline in these systems, which has to be, we have to kind of invert that. But I must also say that as part of world aviation, we're part of an aviation problem in the world at the moment, global problems, challenges, which is not around fuel in this case for us, but generally there's been challenges post-COVID, and it's just factoring in to a slow response by authorities, which I think is not satisfactory for us, and it's inappropriate for them to respond so slowly. It appears that people on holiday, and when they're on holiday, you can't interrupt them, the premiers and the senior people involved in these operations, which is just rubbish. They should be sitting waiting for an issue and take their holidays in September, like the rest of us, or February, when everyone else has come back to work. That's when we in the essential services start looking for our holiday period, as you know, sitting here producing a TV program in the middle of a holiday period.
Now, one would then imagine, just from the examples that you've given, the 3 examples that you've given in terms of what has been happening behind the fuel shortages in this country, one imagines that, as you said, there should be some form of clear plans in place, particularly not only from Airports Company South Africa, but also from the airlines and the fuel supplies, and maybe some coordination from the transport department. Do you get a sense that in the event that something like this does reoccur, that there will be some form of action taken immediately?
I'm not satisfied that there will be, because there hasn't been up to now. So I don't think there's some miracle worker out there that's going to say, well, right, at this point, we will just automatically change the systems of the country based on the rising and obvious need and emergencies that we're having. We need a strategic vision here about all our infrastructure, as you and I know. And aviation is just part of this plan. We need some kind of bigger goal rather than just a middle manager's income for the year, or a hiring procedure that can be boasted about externally and so on. We need some kind of big picture to put together on a regional level and SADC level, the Southern African Development Community level, where we together work on this big picture. And of course, because of our vast areas, Africa is the biggest continent in the world, we need to fly from A to B, whether we're government officials or we're business or we're just tourists. And it's become more of a middle-class thing to do across Africa. So I feel that that's the big thing that's missing that we're talking about here, is an understanding that we don't have to make money out of this operation. We need to satisfy the needs of a growing developmental side in terms of our aviation sector and our plans for infrastructure and aviation. That is the disconnect. There seems to be a belief that you can license to print money if you get involved in aviation, which is just not true. You need to be obsessed. You need to have an art and a science concept around it, and you need to live your life around this section. You can't just parachute in and out as a deployed person in management level. You need to kind of, have airplanes that you string from your ceiling as a 5-year-old and grow up with the whole concept of aviation in your bones. And that's missing. That is missing from the planning and to government level, I'm afraid.
Desmond, very quickly, as we wrap up our conversation, I'd like your thoughts on just what is currently happening from a bigger demand in the airline industry that we are currently seeing, that over the past couple of months has obviously, made ticket prices reach, unbearable, levels. I mean, people are now having to pay so much more money to fly to even shorter destinations. Of course, we know that there are various reasons behind this, but just your thoughts on how the South African aviation industry is currently performing.
Well, this is an amazing question, because around the world there's been a slow return by many of the airlines to what is a growing demand from the user, you and I. And we're not the only ones caught by this. I've been living in Australia and working from there for a couple of months this year, and prices went up 300%. So pretty much in the same line as we here. And that was because they were caught out by the demand. So demand is accelerating now across Africa and across the world for crew members, for specialists in the aviation sector. And during the lockdown period, what happened is many pilots retired who are older. And now there's a demand for crew, and the price has gone up. The fuel price has gone up, for example, by 30%. So and 75% of the input costs on aviation is fuel. So I think that we're looking at high ticket prices for the next year or two. However, if you plan your flights, as I've said previously, I think on the programs on the SABC, you need to plan 3 to 6 months ahead. It's pretty much like when I was a child in the 70s. People didn't just fly. It was really expensive, elite thing to do. So if you were going to do it, you were planning a year ahead. So for us as tourists or people planning to fly to Cape Town or something, you've got to think 3 months, because then your prices will be lower, much, much lower, pretty much along the lines of the end of 2019. If you're planning to fly next week, forget it. You won't find a ticket. And if you do, you're going to be paying 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 Rand return.
Desmond, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Desmond Latham there is an aviation expert, of course, talking to us about all things related to aviation, especially those delays that we saw at Tambo International Airport due to fuel-related issues.